Contract was already open on my laptop when my phone lit up. I had my coffee in one hand and a pen in the other. The document had taken 3 weeks to negotiate. 32 pages. My attorney had reviewed every clause twice. I was 30 seconds away from signing my name to the biggest business deal of my life. A full partnership buyout that would give me sole ownership of the company my grandmother left me when the call came in. It was my attorney, Marlo. Not a text, a call. That's the thing about Marlo. She emails, she schedules, she does not call unannounced on a Thursday morning unless something has gone wrong in a way that cannot wait for a calendar invite. I almost didn't pick up. I almost signed first and answered after. I set down the pen. Don't touch that contract. Her voice was flat and urgent in the way that people get when they're trying very hard not to sound panicked. Natalie, I need you to step away from that document right now. Close the laptop if you have to. Do not put your signature on anything until you've heard what I'm about to tell you. My coffee went cold. I didn't notice for a long time. I want to tell you what my business partner had been planning, what she had set in motion months before that morning, while she was still smiling at me across conference room tables and CCing me on emails and asking about my cat. But before I do, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you stopped watching them? Like, really stopped. Not the performative trust where you say the words but still check. Real trust, the kind where you hand someone your back and genuinely forget it's exposed. Drop a comment. Tell me if you've been there. Because I was so far gone into that kind of trust that what happened next nearly cost me everything my grandmother built. Her name was Simone. We had been friends for 11 years before we became partners. We met in college, stayed close through our 20s, survived each other's bad relationships and worse apartment situations. When my grandmother passed and left me her small textile company, it was Simone who sat on my kitchen floor with me at 2 in the morning, while I tried to understand what inheriting a business actually meant. It was Simone who suggested we run it together. Her background was in operations and supply chain. Mine was design and client relations. On paper, on every single page of every business plan we ever wrote, we made sense. We did make sense. For 4 years, we genuinely did. The company grew, not explosively, not in a way that made headlines, but steadily, the way my grandmother would have wanted. We brought in new clients. We modernized the production process. We hired 12 people who depended on us to make good decisions. We were profitable. We were proud. And then my grandmother's estate attorney contacted me about a clause in the original inheritance documents that I had never fully understood. The clause said this: if the company achieved a net valuation of $2 million or more within 10 years of my grandmother's passing, the full ownership stake would consolidate under my name alone. Not split, not shared, mine. It was something my grandmother had written in years before Simone was ever part of the picture. When the company was just a small operation, she ran out of a converted garage, and the idea of a business partner was hypothetical. We hit the valuation threshold 14 months ago, which meant that in 30 days, on the anniversary of my grandmother's death, I would become the sole legal owner of what we had built together, and Simone's partnership stake, the one she had operated under for 4 years but never actually owned in the legal sense, would dissolve. I found out on a Tuesday. I called Simone that same afternoon because of course I did. She was my best friend. I told her everything. I told her about the clause, about the timeline, about my intention to restructure the partnership in a way that felt fair to both of us. I wasn't going to push her out. That thought never crossed my mind. We were going to figure it out together, like we figured everything out. She cried. She said she was overwhelmed. She said she needed a few days to process. I gave her space. What I didn't know was that she used that space to consult a different attorney. Not her own regular counsel, a specialist, the kind who handles fraudulent conveyance, asset shielding, and emergency corporate restructuring. What Marlo told me on that Thursday morning, with my pen still resting next to the laptop I hadn't closed yet, was this. The contract in front of me was not what it appeared to be. For 3 weeks I had believed we were negotiating a buyout. I would pay Simone a fair market value sum for her operational contributions over 4 years. She would exit the partnership cleanly, and I would take full ownership ahead of the inheritance clause deadline. We had been going back and forth on the number. I thought we were close to an agreement, but Marlowe had received a document that morning. An anonymous email from an address she didn't recognize. Attached was an internal memo written on our company letterhead that I had never seen and had absolutely not authored. It was a memo declaring that Simone and I had entered into a verbal partnership agreement that superseded my grandmother's original inheritance documents. It cited 3 meetings, specific dates, specific language, none of which had ever happened. It was written to look like something I had generated. It had my name at the top. The formatting was identical to documents I had actually written. The contract she had pushed to finalize this week contained a clause on page 27, buried inside a section about operational continuity, that referenced this memo as a founding document. If I had signed, I would have legally validated a fabricated agreement. I would have handed her the grounds to contest the inheritance clause entirely, and the timing wasn't accidental. The 30-day window before the clause activated was closing. If she could tie the ownership question up in litigation, she wouldn't need to win, she just needed to stall. A contested ownership dispute would freeze the company's assets, prevent the clause from executing cleanly, and give her legal team months to build a case around the fabricated memo I had helpfully signed my name to. Marlowe's voice was very steady when she explained this to me. Mine was not steady at all for the first few minutes. I'm not going to pretend I handled it gracefully. I put the phone down, walked to my kitchen sink, ran cold water over my wrists, because that is what I do when I need to get my nervous system to cooperate, and then I picked the phone back up. "Okay," I said. "How did you get this?" She told me someone had sent it anonymously. She didn't know who. I have a theory I'll get to in a moment. "What did we do?" I asked. "We had 30 days. Not 30 days to panic. 30 days to build a case that would make hers impossible to pursue." I did not call Simone. I want to be clear about that. Every instinct I had screamed at me to pick up the phone and confront her, to give her the chance to explain, to let there be some version of this where the explanation was reasonable, where I had misunderstood, where the memo was some kind of bizarre clerical mistake. I knew better, or I made myself know better. Instead, I called my grandmother's estate attorney and requested every original document from the inheritance file. I called the forensic accountant Marlowe recommended and scheduled an emergency review of the past 14 months of company financials. And then I did something that felt strange and wrong and necessary. I kept the meeting. Simone had scheduled us to meet that Friday at the office to finalize the paperwork, her words. I confirmed I would be there. I acted like nothing had changed. In the 3 days between that Thursday call and Friday's meeting, I found things. The forensic accountant found irregularities in 2 vendor accounts that had been set up 8 months ago, both under names I didn't recognize. Both routing payments for services our company had allegedly contracted that I had no knowledge of. The total wasn't catastrophic, but it wasn't small either, and the timing aligned with when Simone would have first understood the inheritance clause implications. Marlowe's investigator found that the specialist attorney Simone had consulted had also represented 2 other clients in similar inheritance dispute cases. In both of those cases, the strategy had involved fabricated documentation presented as lost agreements. One case had settled, one had gone to trial and lost. The estate attorney pulled the original incorporation documents my grandmother had filed and found that the specific language of the clause had actually been notarized with an additional witness signature, something that made it significantly harder to contest than a standard estate provision. My grandmother, it turned out, had anticipated exactly this kind of problem. Not with Simone specifically, she couldn't have known about Simone, but with the general shape of what greedy people do when money becomes real. She had built a small fortress into the paperwork and never mentioned it to me because she hoped I would never need it. I sat in my car in my own parking garage the night before the Friday meeting, and I thought about who my grandmother was. She was a woman who worked with her hands her entire life. She built something from nothing. She never trusted anyone who hadn't earned it, slowly, over years through consistent small actions. She used to say that people show you who they are in the details, not in the grand gestures, and that you should always pay attention to what people do when they think no one important is watching. Simone had been so careful, so warm, so present. I thought about the last 4 years and started seeing the architecture of it differently. The way she had quietly maneuvered herself into managing the vendor relationships, giving her control over the accounts the forensic accountant had just flagged. The way she had volunteered to handle the document management system migration 2 years ago, which would have given her access to templates, formatting, company letterhead. The way she had started asking questions about my grandmother's estate about a year ago, casual questions over lunch, questions I had answered openly because she was my best friend and I had nothing to hide. I wasn't broken by this realization. I want to be honest about that. I think I expected to be. I thought that when the moment came where I truly understood what she had done, something inside me would crack. What actually happened was quieter. It felt like a door closing, not slamming, just closing. The kind of click that's final. I drove home. I slept 4 hours. I got up at 5 in the morning and made the preparations Marlo and I had discussed. The first call I made was to our company's IT administrator. I asked him to preserve and export all system access logs from the past 18 months, every login, every file modification, every document download. He didn't ask why. He had worked for my grandmother before he worked for us. I think he understood more than I gave him credit for. The second thing I did was call a woman named Priya. Priya was our bookkeeper for the first 2 years before she left to take a position with a larger firm. She and Simone had not gotten along. I'd always assumed it was a personality conflict. Priya had left quietly and professionally, and I had assumed that was the end of it. I called her on a hunch. She picked up on the second ring. When I explained, in the broadest terms, what I was dealing with, the silence on her end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "I was wondering when you'd find out." She had seen something 2 years ago, a document on the shared drive that shouldn't have existed, a template modification, something that hadn't made sense to her at the time. She'd raised it with Simone and been shut down so completely and so personally that she had decided to leave rather than fight a battle she didn't fully understand. She had no idea what it meant in context, she just knew something was wrong. She agreed to provide a written statement. Her voice, when she said yes, was the specific tone of someone who has waited a long time to say it. I arrived at the office at 9 on Friday morning. I was wearing the same blazer I had worn to the company's 4th anniversary celebration, the one my grandmother had given me. Dark green, her favorite color. I don't know why that felt important. It just did. Simone was already there. She had brought coffee, the expensive kind, from the place we both liked, and she had set out the contract on the conference room table with a pen placed neatly beside it, the same positioning I had seen from a professional staging a scene. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. The smile was warm. It was exactly as warm as it had always been. That was the part that I had not fully prepared for. She was not nervous. She was not guilty-looking. She looked like my best friend, having coffee on a Friday morning, finishing up an important piece of business. "You ready to finally close this out?" she asked. I sat down across from her. I told her I had a few questions about page 27 first. The coffee cup stopped moving halfway to her mouth. "I want to take you through the next 15 minutes carefully because I think the details matter. Not for drama, for understanding." I put a folder on the table. Inside was a copy of the memo, the one that had been sent to Marlo, with specific passages highlighted. I told her I had received this. I watched her face while I said it. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. The denial was fast and too specific in the wrong direction. She didn't say, "What is this?" She said she didn't know what I was talking about. Those are different responses, and the second one is what you say when you already know what it is. I put the IT access logs on top of the memo. I put Priya's written statement next to that. I put the forensic accountant's summary of the flagged vendor accounts on top of everything. I watched Simone look at the stack of paper. I watched her face go through several things in the span of about 4 seconds. I have thought about those 4 seconds many times since. Then she said, very quietly, "We could still make this work. We could restructure." I told her that my attorneys would be in contact. I told her the forensic accounting findings had already been referred to the appropriate people. I told her that the vendor account irregularities would be fully investigated and that I expected full cooperation and that the degree of that cooperation would likely determine how the next several months looked for her. I picked up the pen. I did not sign the contract. I capped it and put it in my bag. Then I said, "I'm sorry this is how this ends," and I meant it, not in a soft way, not in a way that gave anything back. But I meant it. She didn't say anything when I left. The thing about a betrayal that has been building for years is that it doesn't feel like one sudden event. It's more like learning that the ground beneath a structure you loved has been slowly eroding, and now you have to decide what to rebuild and what to let go. Marlowe's team spent the next 6 weeks working with the estate attorneys to ensure the inheritance clause executed cleanly. The fabricated memo was formally challenged with the IT logs and Priya's testimony as supporting documentation. The specialist attorney Simone had retained withdrew from the case in week 3. I was later told, though not officially, that he had concluded the evidentiary position was not viable. The vendor account investigation found a total of $41,000 in payments for services that could not be substantiated. That matter went to a separate process that I will not detail here. The ownership of my grandmother's company transferred to me alone on the anniversary of her death, exactly as she had intended. On that morning, I drove to the cemetery where she is buried. I brought tulips, which were her favorite, not roses. I sat there for a while without saying anything because she was a woman who appreciated silence, and I learned that from her. Then I told her what had happened, the whole thing, and I told her what I'd found in the incorporation documents, the notarized clause, the witness signature, the fortress she had built into the paperwork. "I think she knew," I said out loud. "I think she saw something I didn't, and she quietly made sure I'd be protected anyway." My grandmother never met Simone, but she had spent 71 years watching how people behave when something valuable is at stake. She had written the protection into the foundation because she understood, in the way that people who have built things from nothing tend to understand, that the threat to what you build almost never comes from strangers. Priya joined the company 3 months later. She manages the financial operations. She does it with a precision that my grandmother would have genuinely respected. The 12 people who work for us still have their jobs. The company is still growing, steadily, the right way. I don't talk about Simone much. There's not a lot to say that the facts don't already cover more clearly than my feelings can. What I will say is this: the version of the story where I sign that contract on Thursday morning before I take Marlowe's call plays out very differently, and I know it, and I don't let myself forget it. Trust carefully, not suspiciously. There's a difference. Suspicion closes you off from everything. Care means you stay open and you stay awake at the same time. My grandmother knew that. She just wrote it in legal language so it would hold up in court. Some lessons are worth more when they're documented. I think about that pen a lot, the way I set it down instead of picking it up. Such a small motion, maybe 2 seconds of hesitation. And I wonder, not in a dramatic way, just honestly, how different everything looks if I don't pause. The thing I keep coming back to is that Simone didn't fail because she was careless. She failed because she underestimated what I had built quietly over years. Not just the company, but the habit of paying attention. My grandmother used to say that wisdom isn't something you acquire all at once. It accumulates in small deposits. Every time you notice a detail others skip past. Every time you slow down when the situation is pushing you to speed up. Every time you ask one more question instead of assuming you already have the answer. I didn't know I had been making those deposits. I just thought I was being thorough. I didn't realize I was also being protected by my own habits until the moment those habits saved me. There's a version of this story where I resent Simone completely, where I let what she did calcify into bitterness that I carry into every professional relationship after her. I understand that version. It would be easy. What she attempted was a specific kind of betrayal. The kind that weaponizes closeness, that uses 11 years of genuine history as cover for something calculated and cold, that deserves to be taken seriously. I'm not going to dress it up as a misunderstanding or explain it away. But I also can't let her define what I become. That's not grace. That's just math. If I spend the next decade suspicious of every person I work with because of what Simone chose to do, then she wins something even after losing everything. She doesn't get that. I decided that in the cemetery, sitting with my grandmother's tulips, and I meant it. What I carry forward instead is this: integrity compounds the same way damage does. Every small, honest choice builds something that holds. Every time Simone cut a corner, falsifying a document, redirecting a vendor payment, shading the truth in a meeting, she was also building something. Just in the opposite direction. By the time she sat across from me in that conference room with the contract staged and the coffee poured, she had constructed a situation that was only ever going to fall apart. The weight of what she had fabricated couldn't hold. It wasn't sustainable. It never is. Priya knew something was wrong 2 years before I did. She left because she couldn't stay in a place that didn't feel clean. That instinct, that refusal to participate in something that didn't sit right, even when she couldn't fully name what it was, that was its own kind of integrity. And it meant she was available when I needed her. The right people tend to be. I am not the same person I was the morning I almost signed that contract. I'm more careful now, in the specific way that experience makes you careful without making you closed. I ask more questions. I read page 27. I listen when something feels slightly off, even if I can't articulate why yet. My grandmother built a fortress into the paperwork because she understood people. I'm building mine in real time, out of attention and documentation and the quiet decision to keep showing up with my whole self intact. That turns out to be enough. More than enough.